precious thing that's often wasted, but can never be recovered. Funny how history is lost over time. Speaking of history, isn't it amazing that no one knows the story about Robert Smalls? Well, I'm Robert Smalls, and here's my story. I was born a long, long time ago, April 5th, 1839 to be exact, to my mother, Lydia Polite, and our slave owner, Mr. Henry McKee, in the beautiful town of Beaufort, South Carolina. You see, I had a very unusual childhood growing up as a slave. In fact, at times, I never really felt like a slave, probably on account of who my daddy was, if you know what I mean. You see, when all the other kids were out working in the fields, I was traveling with Mr. McKee. And as he was conducting his business in and around the streets of Charleston, I was out there playing with all the children, both white and black. Now, my mama, fearing that I did not know what it meant to be a slave, decided to have me go live on the plantation that she was from in Charleston. I tell you, it was quite the eye-opening experience. I was forced to live in the slave quarters, and they had dirt floors. I couldn't play with the rest of the children. I was forced to work the fields, picking cotton, tobacco, and rice. And they even replaced my nice clothes with the rat-a-tat-a clothes that everybody else was wearing. I tell you, I truly learned firsthand what it meant to be a slave. But you know, when I came back to Beaufort, South Carolina, my mama took me down to the central whipping post so I could see firsthand with my two eyes how slaves were beaten and punished. I was very defiant. And mama knew that I was a strong-willed child, and my defiant streak had me questioning slavery, its laws, rules, and regulations, and on occasion, questioning that of our slave master. And mama convinced Mr. McKee to send me down to Charleston so that I could be rented out for work. Now, I had many jobs when I was in Charleston. However, it was in the Charleston harbor that I found my true passion, and it was the love of the sea. You see, on the ship, I had many jobs, from general labor, sailmaker, and eventually a wheelman. Now, a wheelman is no different duty than the person who pilots the ship. However, they couldn't call me a pilot on the fact that I was a slave. Here's the irony. During the Civil War, I was called to pilot a Confederate logistics ship called the CSS Planner. All the while, my primary goal was to make sure that I secure the freedom of my fellow slave members on that ship. And on the evening of May 12, 1862, I saw my chance and I took it. I, along with 7 of the 8 crewmen, decided to make our way to the Union blockade. Now, we successfully navigated through the 5 Confederate harbor forts without incident, because I knew those signals to give at every single checkpoint. Once we got to that Union blockade and that Union officer stepped on that ship, I said, "Good morning, sir. I have delivered to you some of the United States' old weapons, sir." However, I also gave them that code book of everything that you wanted to know about the Confederate Navy, as well as the torpedoes, the landmines that they had set, and I gave them something more valuable than nobody else could give them, and that was my extensive knowledge of the Charleston Harborways and their military configurations. All of this, and I was barely 23 years old, and quickly being known in the North as a hero for all of my daring exploits. You see, newspapers, magazines, they began writing stories. And you know what? The U.S. Congress even passed a law to give me and my crewmen reward money. My cut was about $1,500. That's equivalent to about $40,000 today. And I took my share of the money and I went back down to Beaufort, South Carolina, and I purchased the home of my former slave master, which still stands today at 511 Prince Street in Beaufort, South Carolina. Wow. 2 weeks later, I got to go meet President Abraham Lincoln and recount my story about everything I did, thus laying the groundwork of why African Americans should serve in the Union military. Wow. Now, I served in the Union Navy and the Union Army all the while petitioning for my fellow African Americans to serve alongside me. My constant conversations with President Lincoln and the Secretary of War, Andrew Stanton, eventually allowed African Americans to be enrolled in the Union military, thus changing the tide of the Civil War. So, after the Civil War, I decided to become a political leader. And my involvement in politics allowed me to be one of the founders and leaders of the South Carolina Republican Party, which at that time actually fought for civil rights. You see, back then, the Democratic Party had devised systems that they were heavily invested in the disenfranchisement of African Americans. There's so much more that I could say. I could go on and on, but I won't. I will tell you that my greatest achievement, my proudest moment is of my great-great-grandson, Michael Bulwer Moore, who is the CEO of a planned international African American museum in Charleston, South Carolina. But before I go, I would like to leave you with one last thought. My race needs no special defense, for the past history in this country proves them to be equal of any people. All they need is an equal chance in the battle of life. That's right. I am Robert Smalls, and that's my story.